Oh. Hey, everybody, welcome back. This is take number 2 of work number 29. And I don't know if we're going to explain what happened with take number 1, but you may end up with take number 2 or take number 1 or both takes or something like that. And Dani Katz is here with me. And it's taken a few days, I think, for us to regroup here. But we talked about in take number 1, which was on Monday, so sorry for those of you who are used to getting a word sooner than you're getting it this time. We talked a bit about...
They're so deprived. They're like freaking out because they miss us so much.
Right? Jewish girl fix, right? Yeah, so actually there's some people that really like us, that really like, and I'm like, okay, like, whatever. I hadn't watched, well, I had watched about 15 to 20 minutes of Shadowgate at that point. But because I had chosen intentionally not to watch it, not because I didn't have time or anything like that, but just because I've learned to, when something in my consciousness is telling me not to give my attention to something, not to give it anymore, because, you know, I used to be very easily swayed into things and whatever. And so we talked about it from that perspective of mine not having watched it. And then afterwards, for a different reason, other than that you asked me to, for a different reason, actually, I decided to watch it. And so now we're going to record it this after this. But essentially, my feelings about it are exactly the same as before. But I think we can, now I can explain, right? Before I was just going from intuition, right? Now I can sort of explain why, but I feel exactly the same about it. So why don't you, I talked about this a little bit on the show I just put up with Robert. We recorded a show last night. I put it up. We talked good about Shadowgate, but why don't you, just because I think it's important, tell us how you found out about it, when you watched it, and what your first response was.
Okay. Thank you for being willing to do this again, because I know that this is all me. And also, just so our audience knows, I'm on day 3 of a fast. So let's pray for my brain. As with everything, one of my truther friends sent it to me, and I am into Millie. And actually, I think it might have been Sally. Sally sent it to both of us at the same time, along with the caveat that Millie had just been arrested. And I know I've seen different angles on the arrest piece, whatnot. But because of that hype and because it's the new Millie and I track her anyway, I watched it. And a couple things are interesting to me about this. I think this is crucially important information, and I know that you don't, and I'm really excited to hear why that you don't. I've watched this video 3 times, and every time I watch it and I'm in the middle, I'm thinking, this is so important. Everyone needs to know this. We have to blow the lid on this. Why are these people not in jail? And then within a couple minutes of me turning it off, I forget why it was important, what it's about. This has happened 3 times. Mm-hmm. So part of me is wondering, is something coming through this broadcast? Is there, because they are talking about, so they're talking about psychological warfare. They're mm-hmm. talking about all the collusion in the surveillance that's driving the elections, that's affecting how they're choosing juries and why jury selection is now really unfair. And then a lot of it is as far as I can remember, because like I said, there's this weird thing where it just leaves my brain about how it leads into defunding the police and what they have as far as setting up the technocratic police state, and how the same groups that are slated to profit off of the technocratic AI surveillance police state are the ones who are creating all of this defund the police BLM stuff, which is why I thought it was really important. And then Sally also sent me the follow-up that Tori and Millie did yesterday. And I loved it just because it reminded me of you and me, you know, like 2 truther girls who are so passionate and kind of rough around the edges. Like, that was kind of fun to watch. And I wanted for us to talk about it because I felt like, I know you hadn't watched the whole thing, And I felt like I didn't have the pieces that were important at the ready. And I know it is coming out, came out just before pandemic too. And I'm excited to hear all your information about how it may be detracting, but it feels so important to me that people start to understand the pattern of these sort of consulting groups that are working outside tech, medicine, surveillance, munitions, whatever it is, and how the fuckery runs through these consultants, and they're all kind of in bed together, and how it ties in with Cambridge Analytica. And it just feels really important that we get it so we stop falling for it. Does that answer your question?
So yeah, it explains, it just kind of gave a backdrop here. So the first thing I'm going to start with, and I'll probably end with this too, is your brain is trying to help you by not allowing you to remember it, because there is nothing there that is important to remember. And your brain is actually helping you. Your brain, you are highly intelligent, right? And you have, an ability to record a ton of information and arrange it and put it back in a very meaningful way. That's what you do as a journalist and whatnot. And your brain is trying to help you, because what this was a piece of psychological warfare. Exactly what the film is about is what has been done to the audience that it was targeted to.
Okay, can you unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, so a couple of things. And by the way, we are nothing like Tor and Millie Weaver, because they're agents and we're not.
Okay.
Okay, so, and some of this I just have to tell you because, this from other things in your life, right? Some of this I don't have evidence for. Some of this is just me having been around this culture for as long as I've been around it, and having a feeling from having been through it millions of times, not millions, but many times now, that there's something about this that is not kosher, right? Somebody let some pork into the deli, right? And so, first of all, the way it came at me, right? And the way it came at me was through Robert saying, go watch the Alex Jones show. Millie Weaver was arrested on the Alex Jones show, right? Which wasn't exactly what happened. He played a video of her being arrested. She wasn't arrested on the Alex Jones show. But my spidey sense was up immediately, because I did not buy that as a typical arrest. I didn't buy that they would come without an arrest warrant. I didn't buy that burglary would be the cause for a sealed secret indictment, right? A sealed secret indictment sounds like something that would happen with major trafficking or cartel or mafia kind of shit, or something very, very serious, not burglary. And then the fact that they were allowing her to live stream while this was going on, and she went back inside to get her shoes, right? Usually if you have a sealed secret indictment on somebody, you just want to grab them right away, would be my guess, right? Something about it just didn't sit right for me. And then when Tor, her name is actually Terpsichore, which is a very unusual name.
Is that a name? That's a name? Terpsichore?
Yeah, well, she has a lot of names, so I don't know which one is her actual name, if any of the ones that she's operating under are, but yes, Terpsichore is what is on some court documents from a case that she was involved in that is an ongoing issue. But then she came on, and there was, the way she and Alex were talking, I'm just I've seen Alex do this before, I've heard this kind of thing, this sort of, it didn't have a ring of truth to me, right, at all. So I stopped watching at that point, because I was annoyed with Robert for even bringing this to my attention, because I felt like that was 30 minutes of my life that I was never going to get back. But more and more people kept saying, oh, you have to, then they're like, oh, you have to watch the Shadowgate. And I'm hearing people, and I'm like, why is something trying to direct my attention at this so hard, so with so much force, right? Whenever that is happening, I'm cautious. So I ignored it intentionally for a couple of days, and then at one point I watched a few minutes of Shadowgate, maybe the first 15 or 20 minutes. And so I had some sort of thing going on with that. And then I stopped, and then I went back and watched the whole thing. I watched half of it one night and half of it the other night. And Millie has always been a no for me. She's still a no for me. I do think that Sunrise piece she did was interesting, but in retrospect of the whole situation, I actually think that the purpose of that piece was to grab people like you and hopefully people like me, right? And kind of give her a certain level of validity or validity with people who may not have found her to be important or valid before.
Did you think that the information was incorrect in the Sunrise video?
No, I actually think it was pretty good. I think
that's not super valid that AOC and Ilhan Omar are involved with like recruiting little girls to turn them into violent terrorists.
Yeah, no, I think it was good. I think that video was good. I also actually think that a lot of the information that was presented in this video is true. It's just not new. It's not new, and the way in which it was presented was not actually a cohesive narrative. Like, there's no takeaway from the film that can make sense to the brain, right? Because there was like a narrative of like, well, the deep state is against Trump, but they have to get Trump in because they can't have Hillary in, but the left is using the Cambridge Analytica and the right, like there was no narrative that actually like made a good amount of logical sense. All of these technologies and tactics and tools and corporations and private intelligence agencies and contractors that they're talking about, that all exists. That's existed for a really long time. I would say the amount of information and the actual information that was released in this documentary is maybe somewhere between 0.5 degree and 1 degree further than what the Snowden operation revealed. So for people who were paying close attention, and when the Snowden thing happened, all of us who've been paying attention to, the police state and the surveillance state and conspiratorial stuff for many years, there was nothing in there that we didn't already know, right? We've been told.
But this one reveals Snowden as a deep state operative who was in on it. Is that not new?
So we've always known that.
Okay.
Right, and so the Snowden operation, so Snowden basically told us stuff that we already know, and the people who were already upset about that stuff continued to be upset about it, and almost nobody got upset about it. And if they did get upset about it, they got upset about it in a partisan way. So basically it had the effect of actually demoralizing the truth movement because, right, all this truth was put out there in front of everybody and still nothing happened, right? Sometimes
isn't that what we're up against anyway? Like, you and I have been putting truth out for years and years and years and still nothing happens. So part of, like, I'm feeling like part of the game right now is like, can we put it together in a way that is digestible? None of it's new at this point, and especially to you.
Right. So
but it was pretty cohesive. So
sometimes truth can be used as a weapon, right? Like truth has been weaponized. Like when you have a truth movement, they're not gonna buy a lot of bullshit, especially the longer they've been around. And there's been there's been people researching this stuff forever, but there's been like a very definite truth movement for 20 years now, right? And so you can't weaponize lies against them anymore. You have to weaponize the truth because what they work on is sniffing out truth from lies, right? So it's more effective to weaponize information that appeals to them than the kind that doesn't, right? The Snowden operation is complete. That is all done. So that's the synchronicity and symbolism of the discussion, whether they end up pardoning him or not. That the talk of pardoning him came about just the same time this came out is not, that can't be coincidence. This is the new thing, right? This is the new thing that the Snowden thing was before. And there really isn't that much more new information. It's the next obvious step. Like now, I understand that some people, when the Snowden stuff came out, that was shocking for them, right? But I'm a person that's been living with the consideration in mind for many, 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 many years now that I'm actually being surveilled from inside my own body. I'm not worried about cameras in the corners or my computer watching me or whatnot, because I'm completely aware of the kind of technologies that exist to monitor certain people in other ways, right? That have been, so for me,
right.
like once somebody has like been through a big earthquake, an aftershock isn't scary to them anymore. It
totally. But were you aware that, and I hear what you're saying about the internal surveillance, and you're playing on a different level, on different dimensions, but were you aware that the surveillance state is storing all of our stuff offshore in Germany? Yes. I didn't know that. I didn't know that they hired a Canadian company to deal with our votes and shred all that paper. Like, why is this all of a sudden an international surveillance? One of the
reasons that they do that is because there's laws about conducting certain kinds of operations against your own people, right? So one of the reasons that they have like our intelligence agencies surveil other countries, and they'll surveil us, and then they'll share that information, right? So like they're working, and a lot of, like, just like they hire Blackwater to go do military operations that would be illegal for our military to do, but it's not for a corporation to do. It's the same thing. And it's for money makers for their friends.
But if we know all of this, if none of this is new information, then why are these people not in jail? And why is nothing being done? This is so egregiously out of line.
Right. So, right. And I understand your frustration and your emotions about it, because I was there for a long time too. And that is just not how it works. These people are not going to go to jail. They're not going to go to jail, and nothing is going to be done about it in the way that like would be really satisfying for something to be done about it, right? No one's going to jail. The system's not coming down. There's not going to be some big, huge public brouhaha about it. The only solution to this issue is for people to internally, I love when Savan says understand, to understand what is happening and to choose to walk away from that and do something else with your energy and your time. When enough people do that, when enough people understand how the trick works, they won't be able to perpetrate the trick anymore, and it will fade out over time. But there is not going to be some immediate end, like some satisfying movie kind of ending to this, right?
Okay, I hear that. And just from that perspective, is it not helpful to put out, for Millie to have put out this media so that people can at least wake up to what's happened? Like, it's not fair to compare your knowledge to standard sleepy normie knowledge. Like, most people don't know what you know. Most people aren't putting the pieces together that you're putting together.
This film does not cohesively make sense, right? The main person who is controlling the information in the film, who is Tor, does not have any proof or evidence that she is who she says she is, or that she's done what she says she did. Even in the film, Millie says, "You allege to have worked here." And she doesn't come back and say, "Oh no, I worked here, here's the proof." They just fly with that, okay? So she's just, this is a lot, like she is the controlling the flow of information in this documentary.
Well, there's also the Patrick Berge guy who seemed pretty legit.
I talked to John Brisson because my intuition about Berge is that he's a straight player and he's just naive. And basically they pulled him in because he's the only one who has any proof, evidence, or documentation of what he did. So you need somebody who is legit, so you can sort of spin your web, right? He doesn't even understand the point of the movie. When you listen to him, like his takeaway from this is that, like, yeah, that's why I love Trump. If you actually put the pieces together, there's just as much of an indictment of Trump and his camp in this movie as there is of the other side. It's part of the cognitive dissonance created by this film.
I hear that. I mean, that's kind of endemic to Trump. Like, mention Trump and there's going to be cognitive dissonance and all that other stuff. But I disagree, because what Berge put together was that I don't know if it was like an IIA operation. Like I said, my brain is not holding on to the information, but where he ties in the defund the police to what they're doing with the technocratic state, and he shows the pattern of yes, this is what they do. That felt super relevant and super cohesive.
The information shared in terms of like the things that are going on behind the scenes with surveillance and technology is true. But the way this is put together doesn't make sense to the average brain. And it's like this kind of information really turns off people who are sleepy normies and whatever. It's hard to understand. They can't believe it and they don't want to believe it. So all it really ends up doing is further agitating the people that are already upset about it and creating this, you know, sort of kind of dissonance. It's a spin operation, right? This information is true and valid. They're ready for the public to know about it because there's no hiding it anymore. So spin this out in a way that makes the people who are upset about it look crazy, right? And everybody else is going to be like, I'm not even going to try and get my head around that. Right. And he is sitting there basically like what he was saying didn't even, like what he was saying about what was happening made sense. But if his takeaway from this is that like, you know, Trump is my guy, that doesn't make sense with the information that he presented. And as far as the defund the police stuff, all this like robotic, like police, technocratic police force stuff, like there's information has been out there for a really long time.
Yes, but people don't know it. There's still so many people who think defunding the police is a good idea. So whatever information has been out there, it's not getting in, and defunding the police is a horrible idea.
Okay, but what my point is those people who this is not going to help them know about that. If I tried to share this with my father, like it's not going to go zero place. It's not going to go anywhere. Right. He knows about all of this stuff. Right? My father's willing to entertain a lot of things that I say, right? He might come back and say something nonsense, but these kinds of things, they never work to wake up the kind of people who need to be woken up.
Well, that's what we're up against in general. And that was, you know, I'm like, we could talk about it now. I've been working on Plandemic for the past few months. And when it aired on Tuesday, that was the first time I saw the whole thing together. Mm-hmm. And I had the same opinion. I was like, this is preaching to the choir, and the people who we need to get it are not going to get it. It's too overwhelming. It's too much. It's too destabilizing to take in. And I feel like that's what every truther is up against. How do we get this information out in a way that people can actually digest? And I hope I'm wrong, but I'm just saying that because that was my initial response to my own movie.
So you're wrong, and I'm going to tell you why. So
great.
I did not have high hopes for this as much as I love you and as much as I love David, right? The feeling that I had about Shadowgate was the same feeling I had about Plandemic 1. I never watched Plandemic 1. I felt like something was trying to send my energy over to look at it, that there was all of this noise being created about something, and that this was a piece of truth that was going, whatever it was, if it was truth, it was going to be weaponized. I didn't watch it. Okay. And so like, for some reason, right, I don't know why, right, but over the weekend, I became aware that Plandemic 2 was going to be coming out on Tuesday, right, and that for some reason I had decided, the intuition was like, watch it. And as much as I love you, it wasn't because you wrote it, and it wasn't because David is in it. It just wasn't, right? Like, I really like David, and also there's things that David says that I disagree with, you know what I mean? Like, so it wasn't, it's not like, you know, someone I have like that I'm just all in on, right? Okay. But I noticed that it was going to come out, and I was agitated that it was going to be on Brian Rose. So I was London Real. So I was delighted when I saw Ben Swan was carrying it too. And on Ben Swan's site, you don't have to sign up for any notifications or anything. You can just go there and watch it. No, any nonsense attached to it, right? So I was excited about that. And so that day I sat down and I watched it from start to finish. And I was like, this was really good. In fact, this was so good and so has the potential to be so helpful that it would almost be worth sucking all the air out of the room with some other distraction to keep people from watching this. And almost everybody I know has watched Shadowgate and hasn't watched Plandemic 2. And I did not feel in any way embarrassed, shy, concerned, or anything about, when I was done watching it, sending it to people who are not awake to watch it. It is easy to understand as opposed to Shadowgate, which is not, right? Everything I saw in Plandemic, the Shadowgate 2, it's like, what the fuck was that? That wasn't even a cohesive, like that just made my head hurt. It wasn't even a cohesive narrative. So it's easy to understand and it's well done. and it's very well sourced and documented. And he even acknowledged, I listened to him in an interview with Ben Swan, Mickey, today, that he realizes some mistakes he made with Pandemic 1, and he intentionally did not make those same mistakes with Pandemic 2 in terms of like the way he offered all the sources up and the way everything is there, right? So some of like he has what is it? I can't get a word right now. The thing when you take care of something that you know is going to be a problem before it actually happens. Like preemptive. He preemptively plugged the holes in the raft if there were going to be any, right?
He was so diligent about our fact checking. It was, I mean, he needed to have like 2 or 3 sources for any claim we made. He was on it. We worked our asses off.
In the film, him, David Martin, everybody who they talked to presented well and explained themselves in a way that was very cohesive. And the most important thing he did, like, and this is like picking David Martin to be the person that pulls all this together, because people who don't care about anything else do understand follow the money, right? And the way he was able to tie all, because David's great with financials, right? And whatnot. The way he tied all, because you just talk about vaccines, people are going to think that's crazy. You just, whatever. Like you just talk about masks or that the virus is made up. But when you can follow not only the money trail, but the patent trail and the legality trail, it was incredibly well done. Again, it didn't tell me anything that I already didn't know, like just like Shadowgate didn't. But like when I watched it, I was like, that was an elegant string of information. It wasn't chaotic. People right now cannot take in any more chaotic information because we live in total chaos. And this just created more chaos. And so for the past, and the other thing, before Shadowgate got taken down, it got over 1 million views and was up for 36 hours on YouTube. Plandemic was taken down within an hour.
Oh yeah, Plandemic was taken down super. It is crazy the lengths they're going. I have not seen this kind of censorship like I'm seeing with Plandemic.
They wanted enough people to see it and get that shit in their mind and then think it's a big deal when it gets taken down and this poor girl got arrested and all this kind of shit. And then then the question arose, well, where did she get the money to make this documentary if she's putting it out there for free, right? Well, then in like 24 hours, Ezra Levant from Rebel Media raised all this money for her like $180,000 just over the course of like 2 days. That's how she's getting paid, right? Like this is a stupid case. The case makes no sense. This is over a $50 cell phone and an argument with her mother. Like to have this kind of attention on it. And, the whole thing was a staged operation, in my opinion.
Okay, so just tracking your opinion on this, because do you think the same people who are censoring Plandemic are behind Shadowgate, are working with Millie and Tori?
I think that it's entirely possible because this technology they're talking about exists. So that everything that Mickey has done, unless he doesn't use the internet for anything he does, the people who are watching would be aware of what he's doing, right? Like I'm going to just go far out there on a limb, and I can tell by looking at some people's faces and some people's eyes that he's not that different than you or I, right? And something's been tracking him for a long time inside and out, right? And so he can't do anything in secret, right? He can't do anything in secret. So everybody knew this was coming, right? All the relevant agencies and whatnot. And I'm not saying that the purpose of that they're like, oh, we better put a movie together quickly. Although it is interesting. It's like, well, that's weird. Like if she was so busy working on this, how did she have time to put together that Sunrise thing? This actually seems like it was put together in just a fairly short period of time.
I think it was.
So my guess is that we need you to work on this documentary, here's the funding, just do it, put it together, and we need to rush to get it out at this period of time, right? So I do think so. I think, so there's 2 things I think it was meant to, I don't know which one it is or both. So I think something to do with, either it had something to do with Plandemic, or that's one heck of a coincidence, just like it's one heck of a coincidence that, she gets arrested as she's uploading her film and blah, 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 right? Okay? But the other thing that it covered up, and we talked about this when we recorded it the other day, but this is expanded, is the fact that YouTube quietly changed its guidelines and whatever to say that in order to avoid election interference, we will be deleting any video that covers hacked material. Now remember how important those WikiLeaks leaks were in the last election, and the mainstream media calls them hacks, right? So basically, they probably know something is coming on one of the candidates or the other, and we can all guess which side it's going to be coming on if they're worried about protecting something, right? So they're changing the rules ahead of time. So, and this is how you know you're dealing with nonsense intelligence operations, is in order to avoid election interference, we're going to interfere in the election.
Of course. I mean, they unpacked the hacking narrative in Shadowgate, and I thought they did a good job. And look, I'm not saying that you're wrong, but I'm looking at a few things. One, we're all scrambling to put out our content as fast as possible because those of us who know what's going on want to stop it. we're like, we're not slaves yet. We're not in the Fourth Reich yet. So I think everyone is working as fast as possible to put our stuff out so that we can have a positive impact. And I'm not saying that you're wrong, although my gut, yes, it was inchoate. Yes, it was hard to follow. Yes, I watched Shadowgate 3 times to try to get myself to grok it because it's not a lot.
It's not grokkable. Because
go ahead. No, go ahead.
So all of the people that are the most intelligent people I know, right? Like some of the most intelligent people I know, I've talked to Robert about this, to John Brisson about this, and John Brisson interviewed Patrick Berge for 2.5 hours and agrees with my analysis that this is the person who is telling the truth but is naive and doesn't even understand his own information on a certain level, right? John talked to him for 2.5 hours. You guys can check out his interview with Patrick Berge on We've Read the Documents channel. But all of these people were not aware of Plandemic, or they were aware of it but didn't watch it, right? All these smart people that I know, and none of them had heard about this YouTube thing. But everybody knows about the Shadowgate, right? Now, over the course of the weekend, so this YouTube thing came out on Friday, this information about YouTube doing this came out like late last week. But over the weekend, there has been moves that indicate that Facebook, Twitter, and all these other companies will start doing that too. So now, like before, okay, so you couldn't put up a video about hacked information, but now you won't even be able to share information about hacked information on social media, right? So while everybody is worried about poor Millie Weaver, right? Literally, the ability for us to communicate what is going on during the election season is being taken away.
Yes, I think that's super crucially important for us to pay attention to, and we're witnessing social media destroy itself by its ridiculous censorship. Like, I'm 2 seconds away from going. They're not letting me share, and they're censoring everything I post. They pulled down all of my, like all my friends had so many sweet things to say on my wall about Plandemic. Facebook trashed it all, pulled it all down. Like, we're watching them in the death throes. I'm not saying that you're wrong, but just playing devil's advocate, I think it could just be a weird convergence of timing, especially since we are hurtling towards the election, the concrescence, the whatever this is, that of course this would all be happening at the same time. And I can also see why Shadowgate is getting more press. And I don't know that it's getting more press. I don't really know how to measure it, but the arrest certainly helps anything get press. The fact that Alex Jones fired her, which actually makes no sense because she didn't diss Roger Stone in any way, shape, or form. But I think that those elements add to the sort of like salacious quality, that tends to sell media these days.
Yeah.
But I'm just, the other piece that I think is interesting, just as far as I'm examining everything that's going on, is that we are part of this collective, and we are watching our collective go fucking batshit, not just with the division, their egos flying up, not believing everything. And I'm watching in myself because I have in the past thought things are conspiracies, that I notice that these days things come down the pipeline and I automatically go to, that's not true, that's bullshit, that's, some sort of collusion going on. And part of me is wondering if that isn't part of what is informing your person. I'm not saying it is. It's just a theory that I'm playing with.
So one of the things, like I have lots of things, right? So for me at this point, right, I've been around this information a long time, and but I always have the conversation with myself. I have to be careful that I'm not just jaded and fatigued, because it would be a smart thing to do, and I'm 100% sure they do this, that they just get people, right, fatigued on information, right, so they stop paying attention to something and then they drop the thing, right? So like I have that in my mind all the time. You wouldn't believe the amount of things that I look at that I have no interest in looking at, right? But like there's the only times in my life I've ever gotten in a real lot of trouble, right, is when I had an intuition that something wouldn't be good for me, but I didn't listen to it because there was something I didn't want to miss out, or I wanted to make sure, or whatever, right? That's how I got myself into my drug bullshit. That's all that kind of crap, right? So there was that, and like I went back and forth. Like I spent you were wanting me to watch this, and I spent 3 days being like, I might just I think I'm going to tell her no. Like I think I'm going to tell her no. And then, but I couldn't stop. There was one thing in the film, right, that like there was one important takeaway in that film for me, and it has nothing to do with the content of the film, right? Just like when the Edward Snowden thing happened, it was none of the things that were paid attention to that was the important takeaway. There was a really important takeaway in there for me about what the PRISM program really is, which is nothing what people think it is, okay?
What is it?
What is the PRISM program? Yeah, the PRISM program is about how why there's the ability to surveil somebody from inside their own body, and it's because of a prism, a small, very small crystal, kind of like a little Herkimer diamond, that is in your pineal gland. That when light reflects off of it, it looks kind of like the Pink Floyd logo, right? And this is something that is a high spiritual technology that can be tapped into, right? And it was only sitting with all of this crap that came down from Edward Snowden, right, that got me really thinking about about prisms, right? And why is this, like, in every enormous bullshit lie, right, even if the lie is the truth, there is something in there, right? Like, I'm like, just like I said, like the Q thing is bullshit, but there's a few things in there, right? The Edward Snowden thing was largely bullshit, even though it was truth. Like having our attention drawn to it, like this was shocking news, was bullshit. But the way when I listened to him for hours and hours talk about PRISM and all these disparate things he talked about, in my own head, a narrative came together that made sense to me about what surveillance really was, what encryption really is, why we were having an argument about encryption, right? And this goes into like our DNA and what we really are. It's very deep. So it would take, I've explained it in separate places over the years, right? But there was something in there for me. And there was something in there for me too with the Shadowgate document. So after sitting with it for a long time, I decided to watch it. And I said, you know what, I'm gonna go and I'm gonna look, right? And if afterwards they feel like there's nothing to talk about, I'm just going to tell her, no, I'm not doing another show about, you know what I mean? Or whatever, right? So I went and I looked and I watched it from the very beginning. Again, I had watched 15 or 20 minutes before, and I had seen this part in the beginning when I watched the first time. That bike he has with the full setup for a communications network on the bike. There's something else I'm working on right now that is totally separate, that has nothing to do with this or that or whatever, but has to do with places that they could hide interesting ways of hiding the fact there's a communications network on premises that somebody's not aware of. Okay. Mm-hmm. So when I looked at that bike, it really pulled together some things for me. So that's it for me. Like that's the key. But then also just understanding completely like that what this was, right? Like this was a total, like, get everybody in a tizzy about stuff that they already know, but put it together in a way that confuses their brain more than helps them understand it. And let everybody sit and spin on that with all the histrionics around it while all this other stuff goes on. Like this, it was so clear and obvious, and confirmation that my intuition was good. And I'm not saying that from like a place that like, oh, Emily knows everything or whatever, like, right? Like I don't think that, but about some things, my intuition is right. I've been watching this stuff and listening to this stuff and looking at this stuff for a really long time. And when something doesn't have the ring of truth to it, to me, even if it's the truth that's being presented, right? This was a weaponized piece of information to do exactly what it did. And think about what a masterful mind control operation it is, right? If it has the person who wrote the pandemic too, thinking that this other information is more important than the thing that she just worked on that actually does have the ability to change some minds.
I don't think it's more important. I want to be clear. I don't think it's more important. I think it's important.
Okay. It felt like the energy, like when we were having all these back and forths about it, was like, oh my God, this is so important. And I was like, dude, like, you know, like a pandemic was great. You're like, really? Oh, I have no perspective. And you just kind of moved on from it, right? Like your energy and your mind has been focused on this for the past several days, right? And trying to you watched it 3 times and whatever. And like, I'm not saying like, there's nothing to feel bad about with that, but I'm like, wow, this was actually a masterful piece of propaganda, right? Because the thing that is getting denied in this situation is actually a really good piece of work, a really good piece of work.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I know that you have the perspective that part of this Shadowgate psyop was to detract information away from pandemic. I wasn't thinking of that. Sorry?
I didn't think that until I saw it, when I saw it and just how like, I don't even know what the word is to explain it. But when I sat and I watched it and I was like, wow, that was just really a harmonious, cohesive piece of information that even a person who like violently wants to disagree, if they watch it, they have to acknowledge that there's something going on that doesn't make sense.
And yet it's so interesting to see people online deny any of that. But I just want to be clear. I don't think Shadowgate is more important than pandemic. I've been immersed in pandemic for the past 3 months doing deep research. So I already know that at this point, like I'm up to speed on that narrative. So where it's new, you know, like, and I get it's not new information, but for you having it put together this way was new. Like I've been living and swimming in that for so long. And I think it's all important. I think it's all important, and I'm really excited for this conversation to extend beyond our community of truthers who have already been tracking it. And I'm happy to hear that you feel like Plandemic 2 is going to do that. It's very frustrating for me just to see the extent of the censorship and have friends sending me screenshots from the site that they've hacked into it now. So when someone goes on to, you know, Freedom Platform, or I don't know if this is happening to Ben Swan, but now they get a message that says, this site has been hacked. They're trying to steal your financial information. So friends of mine are sending me screenshots and I'm telling them it's a lie. But then I'm thinking of all the people who don't know me, who aren't really as invested in this knowledge, who are getting that pop-up and are just moving on. So it's,
I didn't get I haven't seen anything like that on the Ben Swan thing. I've been sending everyone to Ben Swan and no one has said anything about that. You know, so, but, you know, I'm not saying that the pandemic will have that effect. I'm saying it has potential, right? It has the potential to have that effect. The Shadowgate has no potential to move a person from one place to another.
No, I mean, even if
it's sit and spin.
Listen, assuming everything that you were saying about Shadowgate was wrong, and I'm not saying that, and that me thinking this is a great piece of media was correct, it still wouldn't move the needle because it's so didactic and inchoate and takes a lot of devotion and intellectual stamina to make sense of.
And yes, like let's just say but I'm also telling you that the reason that your highly intelligent brain is not grokking or getting it is because it's not cohesive, because it's not meant to help you understand anything. Like your brain, you have a really good brain. You understand shit that I don't understand. Okay?
What do I understand that you don't understand?
All kinds of things. You're very smart and you have patience. You can sit with information and try and understand it for a lot longer than I can. For me, it's like I get it, but I don't know. Your brain is doing its job. Your brain is trying to tell you that this doesn't make sense. So leave it alone.
I'm curious to hear from our audience what their take is. I don't know. I want to sit with this. I have been sitting with your perspective on it. Mm-hmm. I'm definitely curious to know.
I'm sure that my opinion, as often, is not going to be popular. I'm okay with that. I'm totally okay with not being popular. Some people who I highly respect and who have helped me to inform my opinion on things disagree with me. Right?
What's Robert's take on it?
He agrees with me.
Okay.
I think at first he was intrigued by all of the craziness around it, and he was like, what is going on? And that was why he tried to pull me into it. But as soon as he saw the whole thing and whatever, it's just, and the show with Robert is up already, people can go look at that. It's a different set of information. There's a little crossover here, but not exactly the same, because I wasn't trying to explain to him why, it's just a different thing. But people who I know who, in my opinion, should know better, right, than to think that this is really important and that she's being made an example. They want people to think she's being made an example of, so that they're, that they get all scared and but she's not really she's in my opinion, right? Like this has been a net benefit for her. This is a net benefit for her, right? This is not, it just is. Like, it just is. Right?
Okay, here's where my spidey sense goes up and where I'm most inclined to lean into your perspective is the fact that Alex Jones fired her. That feels like a stunt. That feels like a big circus show. That to me is the biggest, okay, this is a farce.
My guess would be that the two of them are working for the same murky, thing in the background. And that a lot of this, it's stagecraft. It's private intelligence agency stagecraft, right? Like
I can't keep it straight these days.
So that, anything that gets one worked up and emotionally triggered on a super high level, right? Like at this point, and I used to feel differently. How you're experiencing this whole thing, right? Like, I understand because I've been there. And then I also just know what information has actually helped me in my life, what has helped me to understand the larger perspective and the end game and all this stuff that is going on, and what information really didn't and just kept me stuck in anger and fear for a long time, right? And to the point now where I can tell the difference. There's an energy signature for me that's different. And it doesn't mean, a lot of times there'll be information that I'll pay attention to, and I don't know why it's important, but I remember it and later it makes sense to me, but it's never this stuff.
I get it. That makes sense. I've definitely, everything's accelerating so fast. Yeah. So I'm also attuned to these days, I'm attuned to when a lot of people want me to watch the same thing. A lot of people send me the same thing. That's a red flag. And I am also attuned to when it generates an emotional response. And I'm like, oh, I'm being manipulated. Yeah. I get it.
Yeah. So and it doesn't mean that something has to be 100% accurate to be good. And also something can be 100% accurate, but still presented in a way that is not helpful. Right? And is
that where you're leaning on this one?
So I do think that all of that information that was divulged in there, I'd say is largely the truth. I'd say that there's probably a lot of deception that coming from Tori in terms of her relationship to the information and the material and her personal narrative. I think that Bergie is 100% a straight character, but just is new to obviously he thought it was great to go over and do this in Iraq and Afghanistan to all these people. He thought that was fine to do. And now he's just upset when it's being done here. Right? So there's a certain level of naivete and not wise to the ways of the world with him.
Well, war is one thing, and then using these technologies on our own people when we're not at war is completely different. Like if he's a soldier,
right? But
then yeah, he's not going to have a moral issue.
But they're
using military technology on alleged foreign enemies. It's a problem that they're using it on us.
Right, but we all know that those were bullshit wars too, right? Those are bullshit wars, and we're talking about a person who signed up for the army at age 39, right? Like, you know, it's interesting that by 39,
like Bill Murray in Stripes,
right? So it's, you know, it's a very difficult. I would say, like, take another look at Tor. Right, and it's interesting that her name, she goes by Tor, right? All the names associated with this thing, and I break this down with Robert, are suspiciously symbolic. Okay, all right. Tor is the browser a kind of browser you use for the dark web.
I thought it was Tor, but when I watched the follow-up, Millie was calling her Tori.
Right. So there,
she has spelled the same, but spelled the same.
She has many, many names that she's gone by with various spellings of them and whatever. It seems like the confusion about what her name is part of the operation. It's very interesting. But
I think the key is to pay attention to if other journalists start to get arrested. Like, that's going to be the key, because she's not the edgiest. She's not putting out the most dangerous information. Although I do think, again, the Sunrise stuff is really powerful. But I think let's just see what happens. If it just stays that it's only Millie, then yeah, it's bullshit. But if they start nabbing others.
Well, so look at some of the journalists. So, like, if a journalist is doing something that's really dangerous, they do what they did to Michael Hastings. So that's how we know that the journalist is onto something really important. Is, you know, they do what they did to Michael Hastings, right? The other, you know, there's been a few other journalists that have ended up sort of, you know, jailed or muzzled about things that they've been able to say. It's never this kind of circus show, quite. Right? The Michael Hastings is the most disturbing case of.
What happened to Michael Hastings?
Michael Hastings is, so, you know, he's a journalist. The story is several years old now, so if I don't get all the details exactly correct, he was part of bringing down, I can't remember if it was Petraeus or McChrystal. I think it might have been McChrystal. Right. And then when at the time he died, he was working on an article about whichever one, Petraeus or McChrystal, he didn't get the first time. Mm-hmm. And he is of the left, right? And like really exposing the wrongdoings of these people during, you know, he's exposing the military, you know, industrial complex that the left now defends. He was doing that right during that border time switchover from Bush to Obama, when all of a sudden the people who used to be against the war were now becoming pro-war. So like he was involved in that whole mess, and he had that same thing like Matt Taibbi, where even though his political persuasions himself were more left, there was like a certain amount of bullshit that he's not going to accept, and he's going to tell the truth regardless. And so he, in the days leading up to his death, was very concerned that they were trying to kill him, that they had done something to his car. So he borrowed a car from a friend, right? And I don't know if it was the friend's car that this happened in, or if he gave the friend's car back and was back in his car. But he was basically driving down Sunset, and all of a sudden his car just started accelerating out of nowhere and drove into a tree in the center lane. And there was a lot of people who did a lot of forensic work on it afterwards, of course not the official investigation, basically said that there was a hacking technology that would have allowed this to happen. You can go back, there's, you know, a lot done on this, but.
This is why I will never drive a self-driving car or the cars that have these computers these days, this exact reason.
Yeah. And so, you know, they tried to paint it out that he was a drug addict, you know what I mean? And that was what happened, that he just lost control of his car and whatnot. I'm gonna tell you this, like, they were saying he was a tweaker. Right now, apparently he was on Adderall, like he's had ADHD for many years. A lot of brilliant people and great journalists and stuff do. But I did speed for many, many years, and it definitely made me a paranoid driver that was extra cautious, not one that would accidentally like accelerate my car. Right? Like seriously, like when you're driving on stimulants, unless you've been drinking alcohol or something too, which most people on stimulants are not doing particularly, like if they're paranoid, right? Like you're very extra cautious, always going, you don't want to go under the speed limit because that draws attention to you too, but always going like just 1 mile above it, right? And just being super duper cautious. So that's a hard one for me to buy because he didn't have alcohol in his system when he died. So it wasn't, you know what I mean?
Well, plus the fact, like you said, if he was already concerned about his car and had borrowed a friend beforehand and that was established.
Yeah. So, and of course the story he was working on never really came out. Like it was very weird, right? So they do that to journalists. They do what they did to Andrew Breitbart. That's what they do to journalists that are telling truth.
Oh my God, Steve Bannon. We haven't even talked about Steve Bannon.
Yeah. So, but look at this. So like Robert and I got into this conversation that it's like really interesting that it seems like the only time people get arrested, it's people that are like on the Trump side, right? And so how is that like, if all of these things that are happening are to expose the other side, why aren't they ever getting arrested, right? Like, and so it starts to make you wonder like what's really going on here. The Steve Bannon thing, like it's kind of interesting. Like haven't really dug into it.
By it for 1 second. He is not, the fact that they are accusing him of living a lavish lifestyle, of all the things to accuse him of, he's a schlub. Like, but it's so flimsy and bullshit and doesn't line up with how he presents himself. Like, it just feels like a pathetic, sinking, dying Dem shenanigan.
Yeah, so for me, I can't, I'll just say, I have not dug any more than like an inch below the surface on this one. Just like, I'm not like, I don't have that intuition of like, avoid this like I did with the other thing. It's just not my main focus of stuff. So I think that, I think Steve Bannon is an interesting character because a lot of things that he says are true. They're right. And
exactly.
Like he's had a lot of like, he's not like, he just isn't a clean character, right? And so it's one of these things that like, okay, like do I think that it's possible that he does some shit that's shady? Yeah. Do I think that like probably that they're like something else is going on weird here with this arrest? Yeah, probably. You know what I mean? So I don't know.
My sense is that if he does anything shady, it's not for personal profit. It's for the mission. That's my sense. Weirdly, on the you don't get that from him?
Well, I think he's the egomaniac, a narcissist, and you know what I mean. Like I think I think he's different, but the same as Trump, right? Like if he has this stuff that he's doing, and if it's helpful to people, that's great, but that's not even so much why he does it. He's a guy who likes power, and he likes being right. I've not done the level of listening to him or research on him that you have, so I can't say for sure. But I know that there's like a lot of people who, were around when Andrew Breitbart was around and were very offended by the direction that Steve Bannon took it, that they felt it really delegitimized what Andrew Breitbart had been trying to do. He just, like he has, and some of it is just, he's just not the kind of person that really appeals to me. You know what I mean? That doesn't mean he's guilty of what they say he is. They're going to have to show evidence of that. And it seems like there was other people involved in it who, were doing shady kinds of things. But yeah, no, I mean, basically to me, if it comes down to this, if they can show evidence that he took money that was supposed to be for building the wall and did something else with it, that's wrong and he should be in trouble. If they can't show evidence, then they shouldn't. And if he did do that and they're busting him for that, then they also need to bust other people who've done similar things that haven't been busted yet on the other side.
Here's why I find it so ridiculous. And yes, I have a crush on Steve Bannon. So it's going to be harder to convince me that he's, an evildoer because I adore him. But the fact that all of the, I haven't checked it out today, but as of a couple of days ago, it was just the mainstream media repeating the exact same you know, the same bites and they all had the same script. Yeah. And the same script was to support his lavish lifestyle. Right. And that is just so ridiculous. It's like, do you even know who you're accusing? Like, whoever created the story, if this came out of Bannon Company, then they let some shitty intern come up with this, because it doesn't even sound legitimate for this guy.
I think that, like, so I don't know, I can't, he certainly doesn't present himself like a lavish person, but neither does Michael Moore. And Michael Moore apparently has some extravagancies that people are critical of. So I think that could be true of Bannon as well, right? Okay. So I think that's like, you know, some people are just schlubby. Jeffrey Epstein was schlubby too. He wore a fucking sweatsuit everywhere, right? But he obviously had other extravagance, you know, kind of things that he did. So I think maybe he has some secretly lavish lifestyle or whatever it is. I don't know. But there's something here that is really about, there's a huge feeling of grandstanding about it to me, whether he did it or not, like the big deal that's being made about it, right? The fact that, like, when there is definitely the thing out there that, like, whenever someone from the right does something wrong, they're a horrible person and they're a terrible criminal and they must go to jail. And whenever someone from the left does it, it's like, you know, oh, you're overblowing stuff. It's not really a big deal. They didn't mean to. They didn't know that was the law. That definitely exists. But I also know, and this is something like, you know, so you and I come from a very similar place politically. Like, we were more of the left in our political days, right?
Everyone thinks that about me, and it's not true. I've been libertarian since high school.
Interesting. But I would definitely say that you existed in a left social culture.
Yes.
And
yes.
Some of your values would be something that, like, maybe until recent times when people are taking a new look at these things, would have been considered something that was more of the left.
People love to think that about me.
Well, I mean, I think some of my social values are more of the left, right? Like, I would say that, like, for me, like, you know, like, I'm not into politics at all, right? But I feel like people can do it. I don't care if people can do whatever they want. If they want to be a flying, three-eyed, purple-haired monster transsexual, well, I don't care. Yay for you, right? Like, just like, we don't need everyone's approval about it. Like, that's the thing I don't understand, is why we all have to clap and shit like that, right?
Right.
So, like, some of my social values are more of, like, the traditional, like, socially libertarian, you know, socially minded libertarian. That used to be more associated with the left, like, right? And it's changed. So my point is like, you and I we weren't raised in, like, a Republican, conservative, Christian family. You know, whatever, right? Like, that is not what our background is. Okay. So when I came up, and the people I was always surrounded with were more of the left, right? So somewhere in my head, you know, so that was just the reality I came up in. And when I started to discover what was really going on, right, and how devious some of these people that we were always told were heroes on the left actually were, I had, you know, and a lot of the people that, like, you've appreciated in your life, you've looked up to and stuff, have been people of the left, people whose work you've liked, right? Like, we went through some of this stuff with, what was the guy who was the Buddhist guy?
Oh, Robert Thurman.
And, like, some of the authors that you've liked and some of your thinkers, you know, they've always been more people that would be considered. Yeah, I mean,
I'm all about freedom, but it's just like, I grew up in Van Nuys. So growing up in a Mexican barrio in Los Angeles, I had different ideas about open borders. I had different ideas about affirmative action. Like, I wasn't left on those specific things.
But some of this other stuff, you were, right? You grew up in that sort of thing. Me too. Okay. So when I discovered that people who I always thought were good were doing all of this icky stuff, like, for a good long time, some of the characters from the right that I had always been told were bad, like, suddenly I was like, oh no, they're good, right? I really like these, I felt like there even, like, I'm gonna be honest about this, and this is, like, I think we've all, like, you and I have a common friend that we sometimes recognize this in and whatever, but there's almost something exciting about saying something that's going to piss off the people from the left, right? Like, there's almost like there's like this weird seductive quality to some of the gross things that people from the alt-right say or whatever, right? Because we're like, you're in this like when you find out you've been lied to, the rejection of the side that you were lied to sends you like in one way or another energetically into the arms of the other side, and it takes a while for that to come back to center. And I'm completely at the place now where it's like I just can see the machinations are very similar from both sides. They just have different styles. Right? They have different presentation styles. They have different rhetoric. They have different games they like to play, but the monster that lives beneath them is similar, right? Like yeah. And so like, there's lots of stuff that a person comes to on their awakening journey that you got to before I did, but some of this stuff that we're talking about today, like I just got to, like our train was stopping in different orders, right? And so some of this stuff, I'm just more like, you know, and sure, I can become jaded because I've been used to it for so long, and I'm cautious of that. I have people I check in with to make sure I make sure I talk to people that I disagree with, people I agree with, and whatnot. But my assessment of Steve Bannon is that there's stuff there that if we knew, we wouldn't like.
Right? I'm sure you're right. Here's why I love Steve Bannon. Mostly because he's smart as fuck. And because I remain agnostic on Trump, I am not inured to the fear that can come up around, what the fuck is this guy doing, right? Like, I have had those moments of, oh shit, like, is anyone even steering the ship? And as you and our audience knows, I'm really interested in the China conversation, and I have been tracking that conversation. And when Steve Bannon talks about A, what Trump is doing, and B, what's going on in China, I feel held. I feel like, okay, someone knows what's going on.
I think that he's probably being punished right now for his outspokenness on the China issue, right?
For sure. I think so, absolutely.
I think it's possible that he did misappropriate funds from the wall thing, but that if it was anyone other than Steve Bannon, there'd be like a slap on the wrist or a fine or a give the money back or whatever, but they're making a huge show of it because of this China thing. They're leaning into him on that because they want.
They're also making a huge show of it because of the election, and this is only going to amp up. So of course they would, and we'll see if they have evidence. Like, in my mind, I do put Steve on a pedestal because he's the only one I could see who understands global politics and actually gives a shit about the American people and the safety of the American people.
Okay, so
I'm not, I'm a little biased because I hold him like as some sort of authority that I can trust, because we don't really have any of those in politics these days.
So the China thing, like, I do think that's a huge deal. And like, that's the story. When all this other noise is going on with all the shit with the election and the Russiagate and the focus gets taken off. I don't know how after coronavirus and everything, focus can be off of China, but it always is. And obviously the stuff that's
always
is really weird.
China's the Democratic Party at this point.
It's right. And it's going on here too. But here's the thing. So I think like Steve Bannon was the person who really brought your attention to China. And so you appreciate that. I have certain people like that too that have done everything else wrong, but they brought my attention to something that needed to be too. So I will always appreciate them for that. But later I realized that they were a mixed bag, or they were mostly no good, but that was important. The China thing, like, my attention was brought to the China thing, like about the same time I first heard about like all the Yuri Bezmenov and the Soviet Union stuff. So back like 2010, 2011, whatever, when I fucking realized that China had already, they were trying to scare us with, oh my God, one day China's going to invade. No, China's already invaded. They invaded with plastic crap at Walmart, right, in the late 90s and into the early 2000s. And basically Walmart has their own intelligence agency and military and shit like that. That's how China does warfare. China does not invade with guns and shit like that. They do the
Not yet.
Look how they have inserted themselves in Africa as opposed to how we do it. Right? We go in with guns blazing and doing all sorts of damage. China goes in there and is like, let us partner with you. Let us build this mine, blah, blah, blah. We'll give you jobs. We'll take more and we'll subvert other aspects of things, but we're going to improve your quality of life. We go in there and fucking take people's quality of life away.
Yeah, they play a long game and they play it really subversively.
So they've invaded our country with plastic crap that people think that their life has gotten better from buying. And eventually people in Africa will realize that their lives didn't get better from doing business with China either. But in the short term, like, it took them out of a certain level of squalor, and just like Walmart enables people who couldn't afford things from department stores before to have stuff, right? That China's fucking smart that way. They're, you know, and they don't, it's, so I've been up on the China thing for a long time. I didn't need Steve Bannon to really bring my attention to it. Someone else did earlier, right? But in this more technological age, it was smart that he brought attention back towards China through the Huawei issue, right? Because that, you know, that is an issue.
Well, also through them taking ports that didn't belong to them and loading them up with military, you know, like, that's a big deal. That's a freaking problem. And it's another piece that I actually really liked. Oh, sorry. What?
Our country sold or gave some of those ports to them.
Obama rented those ports to them and put Adam Schiff in charge. And that's another piece that I loved about Shadowgate. I did love hearing Tori talk about, I heard all those conversations, Adam Schiff. I loved all the mentions because, you know, I mean, just from being in LA and what he did to our fucking city, I'm very happy to hear someone speak out against Adam Schiff. That made me happy.
Yeah. So, yeah, no, I get that. And I like, you know, and it's, you know, like those are things we all know. I don't think that like that's something that like, you know, like those are things.
And I know some people like him. That's crazy to me. Some people like Pelosi. That's crazy to me. Some people think that they're genuinely excited about Joe Biden. I can't even rock that. Like, it's okay if you don't like Orange Man, but are you that full of shit to yourself that you're gonna say this is a good choice? Like, just say Orange Man bad and we don't have a good Democratic candidate. Just be honest.
You should see like the mental gymnastics my father is having to do to try and explain to me why this is such a smart move with having Joe Biden. I'm just like, oh my gosh.
Oh my God, terrifying.
People's brains are broken.
Totally.
People's brains are just broken. So that's
why I loved the show you did with, is it Elisa, about how everyone's under, like, that was really helpful framing of, yes, everyone is under mind control. You guys did a great job with that show.
Everyone's under mind control. It's at varying levels and like, you know, varying awarenesses and whatnot, right? And just because, like, I'm under mind control, right? But the fact that I'm aware that I'm under mind control makes me less susceptible to some of the forms of mind control that has to be like worked at harder. Right. So like what I guess my message to you and like my brain, your brain is trying to help you make it harder for them to mind control you. So trust your brain. You have a good brain, right? So trust your brain. And if your brain said no 3 times, it's no.
Okay.
Like there's a lot of poetry to base.
There is something to that. It's like anytime I delve into the sovereignty conversation, my brain taps out. It's like, no, we're not going there. So I appreciate the framing that there's a reason why it took me 3 times and I'm still not retaining it.
It's a similar kind of waste of time, right? Because like the sovereignty thing, while there's a ton of truth to the information being presented there, right? Like when your life becomes all about filing paperwork to try and become sovereign, you're also not free and you're just on a different list. I mean, Sonia had like a show called Sovereign Mind Radio and a magazine and whatever. And at a certain point, she's like, what the fuck did I just spend all of these years working on?
Exactly, because you just give energy to the thing that we don't want to be a part of.
Right, and so it's a similar kind of thing. And so, you know, like, there's a poetry to baseball, once, twice, 3 strikes, you're out, right? That kind of thing. And you know this so one of the best things to do when you're dealing with information is remember how your body works with food. And you have a sensitive body with food, right? And sometimes you have something you want to eat, you have a bad reaction, but then you try it again a little later under different circumstances. It usually takes about 3 times and you're like, no, dude, I tried, this is a no food for me. So the same rule that you assess how you're going to feed yourself with, information as well.
I like that you're sharing this with me as I'm fasting.
Right. So like, it's just like, for me, like I got much better at assessing information after I cleaned up my diet. Now there's a correlation in how like my brain works better on certain food, but also when I started to make better choices about what I put in my body, it helped me to make better choices about what I put into my mind, because the food is information for the body and the, you know, right. So it was a great training lesson. It's a great metaphor for all of that kind of stuff. Right. And so like, if you're, you know, when your body body doesn't like something, you can keep giving it, but it's the react that it's going to make things worse and worse, right? And it's the same with this. So trust your brain.
Okay. Thanks for being willing to re-record, Em. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right. Anything else going on? What's going on in your world? You recorded the one with Justin today. Is Justin okay? He lives up near the fires. Your friend, I don't want to say his name yet because he will be on the show with us at some point. His house
burned down.
I know.
Totally burned down. Yeah, Justin's house is still standing now. I'm doing a ton of podcasts about Plandemic 2 right now. So I just did one with Certified Health Nut, and I have a bunch coming up.
Oh, cool.
So I'm just doing same old, and kind of like, yeah. And then there's this new book that I'm writing, and all the rest, same.
Okay, cool. So, yeah, I do. I'm just going to record this here, though. Her friend whose place burned down, I find, like, I understand there's a fire going on and whatever, but I mean, it's curious timing, right? Like, he's about to start broaching this topic about his past, right? And, you know, and then his house and all of his belongings burnt, right? Like, which I assume.
But all of Santa Cruz is on fire. And did you see, I don't know if you've seen images of the lightning bolts that started it. They were like, I've never seen lightning bolts like this before.
Like they're the fake ones?
Crazy.
Yeah, like they're something else.
It's like a Tesla coil coming down from the heavens or something.
Yeah. That's pretty much where we're at right now.
Yeah.
Pretty much. All right, guys, we'll be back soon with next one. We're going to be into the big threes. This was 29. By the way, like, just an update. Like, so Cynthia McKinney, we were hoping that she would have been with us for this number 29. She did finally, the last time we recorded, I was like disappointed she hadn't gotten back to me. She did get back to me, and she had been working on a book, and so hadn't been paying attention to email. And then she got herself into this situation where her email box is full. And so, like, she was so full, she was trying to go through them. So she said to me, please, I would love to do an interview with you. I would like to talk about this, and this. Please contact me on Skype. So I contacted her on Skype, but I realized we're not linked on Skype yet. So if other people are contacting her there, like, I don't know. She asked me to contact her there. I haven't heard from her there. And now that email box that I originally sent things to is just bouncing everything back saying it's full. So, but the note she sent me was very nice. So when the moment is correct, Cynthia McKinney will be with us to explain it all. And, yeah, so it is not everybody hates Dani and Emily. Right? The people in
That's the IDW.
Right. So, oh my God, yeah. So anywho, that's just getting kookier and kookier. Watching that little, I mean, it's off to the side now. Oh, and what do you think? What do you think about the Tim Pool Adam Krieger breakup? Right.
I don't know anything about it.
Oh yeah. So that's, you know, just it's better. It's really just better. So on the last Matrix Mash, not the one I put up today, but the one from a couple weeks ago, we talk about it. The whole Tim and Adam and this whole shtick that they have going and whatever. But yeah, they broke up. All of a sudden, it was just like, oh, Adam's not on the show anymore. After they had just had this massively popular, they were having podcasts every night and pulling in thousands of dollars on Super Chat. Like, I was going through and counting and unable to keep it up. Like, I'm talking about like thousands of dollars an hour. Right. And then there was they didn't explain why they broke up, but they broke up, and now it's like $5, $10. So this has been for Tim. Like, this is not a good, it's probably a worse thing for Tim than it was for Adam. But to just think that you can have such a successful podcast and then not explain why you're not together anymore is pretty interesting. Just pretending like, oops, we just have, just something personal is going on. Sorry, guys. No, it just was very funny. Yeah, the Tim Pool thing is just weird. I don't know. Sargon of Akkad called him out as a Trump lover a few weeks ago, and things seemed to, like, it was weird. Like, it seemed to devolve. Like, well, first of all, like, Robert and I had that show where we talked about him, and then things seemed to get a little weirder, and then Sargon of Akkad called him out. I'm like, everybody's kind of made Tim's number. So this is kind of interesting. And then the Adam thing happened.
Tim come out and pledged allegiance to Trump?
He said unless something changes, he's voting for Trump, but he acts like he's very dismayed at this idea of he can't admit he's a Trump lover. It's all right.
I don't know. I don't buy, like, and you and I never agree on Trump, so it's fine. But I feel like I know a lot of sane, intelligent people who feel like they're going to vote for Trump, who aren't Trump lovers. If people are invested in the system,
Right.
Some people can decide that he's the best choice. And it's very hard for people to say anything positive about Trump and not be marginalized as a Trump lover in this culture.
I agree with you. I think there are some very intelligent people who were lefties before, who are choosing to vote for Trump, who have a very good, logical, reasonable explanation as to why they're doing it. I wouldn't classify them as Trump lovers at all. But what Tim does that's funny is now all of his media is spun to be sort of pro-Trump, anti-Biden, while he still continues to sit there and say, I don't know, I don't really like Trump, blah, blah, blah. There's a cognitive dissonance there, and that's why
I think there's cognitive dissonance because Tim Pool was a super lefty, and he says that all the time. I think there's a cognitive dissonance for people who find themselves moving away from the left and leaning into Trump. I think it is confusing. There are so many reasons, but just the way that it's reputation destroying. And I think it just is cognitive dissonance for those people who are making that choice.
Remember, we definitely, I'm just going to bring back Robert's wonderful quote from about a year and a half or 2 years ago. We're living in a time of cognitive dissonance. I'm going to call it hognitive dissonance because it was when David Hogg was on his little route, a world tour after the Parkland shooting or whatever. You are right. You know what I mean? But sometimes, if you're making a decision, right, that you're going to do something or that this is your preferred point of view, now just own it. Don't go to such extents to tiptoe around it and explain it away and whatever. Whenever that's happening, it's if you know who Carrie Smith is? She's an anti-SJW who, she used to be an SJW and now she's not, right? And she was on both with Karlin Borisenko this week and with Tim Pool explaining why, as a person who used to be of the left and very much an SJW, why it is that actually now she's going to vote for Trump. And she says a very good, logical, and intellectual explanation for it. And I think that people should just do that instead of having to try and go to all these lengths to excuse away the fact that they're now Trump supporters. She made it.
Yeah, but I think you're a more self-actualized, confident being. You also have a few years on Tim. And I think given public backlash on being forthright about one's support of Trump is hard for a lot of people to deal with. And I also think as a journalist, it can be very harmful for him. So I'm with you. Yes, it'd be great if everyone could own their shit. And I don't know that Tim's that dude,
Yeah, no, I agree. But it's been an interesting to watch. So, all right. So that wraps it up for us. You can find her at DaniCats.com. You can find me right here because you already did. And we will see you next time. All right. Bye.